My name is Emily Carter, and for the longest time, I believed I was living in the middle of a fairy tale. I grew up in a modest home with parents who worked hard but never had much to give beyond love, guidance, and a belief that I could achieve anything if I kept my integrity intact. We weren't rich, but we were happy. I carried that belief with me when I met Nathaniel. Nathaniel Hughes wasn't just handsome, he was magnetic, the kind of man who made heads turn when he walked into a room. But it wasn't just his appearance that drew me in, it was the way he carried himself. Confident, charming, with a laugh that could light up even the darkest day. I met him at a corporate charity gala where I was volunteering. I was helping organize the event, running around with a clipboard, making sure everything stayed on schedule when he approached me. He wasn't like the other donors, arrogant, self-absorbed, flashing their wealth like badges of honor. Nathaniel was attentive, curious. He asked me questions about myself, not just about the event. I still remember the moment so clearly. I was standing by the refreshment table tucking a strand of hair behind my ear when he said, "You look like you're the one holding this entire night together." I laughed nervously and told him I was just a volunteer, but he smiled in that way of his, gentle yet confident, and said, "Then you're the most important person here." That was the start of something I thought would last forever. We started seeing each other after that night. At first, it was little things. Coffee, dates, late-night phone calls, walks in the park. But soon, he was introducing me to dinners at five-star restaurants, weekend trips to the coast, and gifts I could never have imagined for myself. I tried to refuse sometimes. After all, I wasn't used to being spoiled. But Nathaniel had this way of making me feel like I deserved it all. Months turned into years, and our bond only deepened. He was everything I thought a man should be: supportive, attentive, and kind. He told me I was the woman he'd been waiting for all his life, and then came the proposal. It wasn't at some crowded restaurant or over-the-top spectacle. It was in the most intimate, personal way. Nathaniel took me back to the park where we'd first shared a kiss. The leaves were just beginning to turn, the air crisp with autumn. And as we sat on that familiar bench, he took my hands into his and whispered, words I'll never forget. "Emily, I don't want to just love you in moments. I want to love you in forever. Will you marry me?" He slid a diamond ring onto my finger before I could even answer, but my heart was already screaming yes. I thought it was perfect. My friends were thrilled. My family cried tears of joy when I told them. For a girl like me, who'd always dreamed of a love story that was about more than wealth or status, it felt like destiny had finally smiled down. Planning the wedding became a whirlwind. Dresses, venues, guest lists. It was a dream I didn't even know I wanted until it was suddenly in front of me. Nathaniel's family was heavily involved too, especially his mother, Evelyn Hughes. She was the kind of woman who commanded every room she entered. Elegant, polished, and intimidating to the core. At first, she seemed kind enough, welcoming me with warm words and polite smiles. But beneath it, I sensed something else. Something sharp. Nathaniel's father, Richard Hughes, was quieter but no less imposing. A man of wealth and power, respected. In business circles, he didn't say much during our first meetings, but when he did, his words carried weight. They were old money, the Hughes family. The kind of people who measured worth in assets, not in kindness. And though I was welcomed at the surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being constantly evaluated, weighed, and measured against some invisible standard. Still, I believed love could overcome anything. I told myself that once they truly saw who I was, once they saw how deeply Nathaniel and I loved each other, they'd come around. After all, love wasn't about money. It was about loyalty, about choosing someone no matter where they came from. At least that's what I thought then. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of planning, laughter, and excitement. Nathaniel and I would stay up late talking about our future, our dream home, the children we might one day have, the adventures we'd take together. I felt safe, secure, absolutely certain that I had found my forever. But even then, there were little cracks. Tiny, almost invisible at first. Evelyn's comments veiled as compliments. "That dress is lovely, dear, though perhaps something more understated would suit a woman of your background." Or Richard's sharp questions about my career and finances, spoken with that detached tone that made me feel as though I were on trial. Nathaniel always brushed it off. "That's just how they are," he would say, squeezing my hand. "They'll come around." I wanted to believe him. I did believe him, until the night everything began to change. It was a dinner at the Hughes estate, 1 month before the wedding. I remember walking into their sprawling mansion, feeling out of place in my modest dress while chandeliers sparkled above my head. The table was set for 6: Nathaniel, myself, his parents, and his 2 older siblings, Victoria and Charles. The wine flowed, the conversation danced from one topic to another, and for a while, it felt almost normal, until Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her voice smooth and cutting. "Emily, dear, we've been discussing something as a family. Before this wedding can proceed, there's a matter we need to settle." I looked at her. My fork paused halfway, to my mouth, unsure what she meant. That was the first time I heard the word prenup. And with that single word, my fairy tale began to unravel. The word prenup lingered in the air like smoke after a firework, impossible to ignore. I set my fork down slowly, trying to process Evelyn's tone, the casual cruelty behind her perfect smile. "Prenup?" I repeated, my voice quieter than I intended. Evelyn's fingers tapped lightly against her wineglass. "Yes, dear, a prenuptial agreement. It's standard practice in families like ours. I'm sure you understand. It protects the legacy we've built and ensures stability." Nathaniel immediately jumped in. "Mother, this isn't the time." But Richard's voice cut across the table like a blade. "It's exactly the time, son. Marriage is a contract. Business and marriage aren't so different. You wouldn't enter into a business deal without protections, would you?" Victoria, Nathaniel's older sister, smirked into her glass of Vence Chardonnay. "Besides, Emily, it's really no big deal. Just some paperwork. If you're truly marrying for love, as you say, then signing it should mean nothing to you." I felt my stomach twist, heat rising to my face. For a moment, I looked at Nathaniel, silently begging him to step in, to defend me, and he did, though not as firmly as I needed. "She doesn't need to sign anything," he said, his jaw tight. "Emily and I love each other. That's all that matters." But Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes sharp, her smile thin. "Love is a wonderful thing, Nathaniel. But money is security. Money is legacy. We've spent generations building this family's wealth. And forgive me, Emily, but you don't come from our world. You wouldn't understand the responsibility that comes with it." The table went quiet except for the clinking of silverware. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to tell her that love and loyalty were worth more than any number in a bank account. But in that moment, surrounded by their cold, judging eyes, I felt small, insignificant. Dinner ended on that bitter note. Nathaniel drove me home, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his silence heavier than words. Finally, he spoke. "Don't let them get to you, Em. They've always been like this. My family cares about appearances, about money, but I don't. I love you. That's all that matters." I nodded, but a seed of doubt had already been planted. The weeks that followed were a blur of passive-aggressive remarks, thinly veiled insults, and subtle manipulations from his family. At a bridal fitting, Victoria accidentally mentioned how Nathaniel's ex-girlfriend would have looked stunning in lace. At a rehearsal dinner planning meeting, Charles, his older brother, leaned over and asked, "So, Emily, what exactly do you bring to this marriage besides your charming smile?" Even Evelyn, with her polished manners, couldn't resist her barbs. One afternoon, while reviewing the seating chart, she said, "We should perhaps keep your family's table toward the back. It'll be less awkward that way." Each jab cut deeper than the last. And though Nathaniel always apologized, always tried to soothe me, I could feel the pressure building. Then came the envelope. It arrived one morning, hand-delivered by a man in a tailored suit. A thick stack of papers, bound neatly with a letter, clipped to the front. "Emily, we believe it is in everyone's best interest that you sign this agreement before the wedding proceeds. Without it, we cannot, in good conscience, support this marriage." At the bottom, in Evelyn's looping script, was a chilling ultimatum. "Sign it, or the wedding's off." I stared at the words until they blurred. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands shaking as I flipped through the pages. The prenup wasn't just protection, it was a declaration. If I signed, I would be entitled to nothing. No share of assets, no claim to property, no rights if Nathaniel ever decided to walk away. It reduced me to nothing. A placeholder, a guest in his life with no value of my own. I confronted Nathaniel that night. He looked furious when I shoved the papers into his hands. I never asked for this. I don't care about the prenup. This is my family's doing. You know I love you." "Then tell them no," I whispered, tears burning in my eyes. "Tell them you won't let them control us." He hesitated, just for a second, but I saw it. That tiny flicker of doubt. That moment where love was weighed against loyalty to his family. And that was when I realized this wasn't just about a contract. This was about power, about control, about whether I would ever be seen as an equal or just as an outsider they tolerated until they could get rid of me. I didn't sign. Not then. Not when Evelyn called me personally. Her voice sugar sweet, but her words venom. Not when Richard reminded me of the opportunities marrying into their family would provide. Not when Victoria smirked and said she gave it a year before Nathaniel came to his senses. I held my ground, but the wedding day loomed closer, and the pressure mounted, the whispers, the threats, the constant reminder, sign it or the wedding's off. And though I didn't know it then, their greed, their arrogance, would soon become the weapon I used to destroy them. The days leading up to the wedding should have been the happiest of my life. Instead, they were suffocating. Every morning, it seemed like another message arrived from the Hughes family, reminding me of the unsigned papers. Every interaction became a battlefield. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was direct, ruthless. One evening, Nathaniel invited me to dinner at his parents' estate again. He promised me it would be different this time, that he'd talk to them, that things would calm down. But when I walked through those grand iron gates, past the fountain and manicured gardens, I felt like I was walking into enemy territory. The family was already seated when I arrived. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, regal as always, her diamonds catching the chandelier's glow. Richard sat stiffly, his expression unreadable. Victoria and Charles were on either side, both smirking like they were in on some private joke. Nathaniel pulled out my chair, kissed my temple, and whispered, "Just breathe. I've got this." But the moment we sat, Evelyn spoke. "Emily, dear, we need an answer. The prenup has been sitting unsigned for weeks. This hesitation is concerning." I swallowed hard, my palms slick with sweat. "I told you before, I don't feel comfortable signing something that reduces our marriage to nothing but money." Victoria's laugh was sharp. "Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. It's just a formality. Everyone in our circle does it." Richard leaned forward, his voice low, deliberate. "This isn't negotiable. If you want to marry into this family, you will sign." I turned to Nathaniel, my last hope. He met my gaze, his jaw tight, his hands clenched on the table. I waited for him to say something, anything to defend me, but what came out shattered me. Maybe just sign it, Em. It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't change how I feel about you." The words hit me like a slap. My chest ached, my vision blurred. He was supposed to be on my side, my partner, my love. Instead, in front of his family, he folded. Evelyn's lips curled into a smile of victory. "See, darling? Nathaniel understands. This is what's best for everyone." I wanted to scream, to flip the table and walk out. But I sat there, silent, shaking with rage and humiliation. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze. I barely tasted the food. Every laugh, every smug glance from Victoria and Charles burned into my memory. When it was finally over, Nathaniel drove me home in silence. At my door, he reached for my hand. "Em, please, don't let this come between us. I love you. We're so close to the wedding. Can't we just get past this?" I pulled my hand away. "Get past it? You just asked me to sign away everything. Do you even hear yourself?" His voice broke. "It's not like that. It's just easier this way. It keeps them happy. Once we're married, none of it will matter. But it did matter. It mattered because it showed me something I hadn't wanted to admit. Nathaniel loved me, yes, but he feared his family more than he respected me. The next few days were worse. Evelyn began calling me directly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Emily, darling, don't you want to prove your love? This isn't about money, it's about trust." Victoria sent texts filled with insults disguised as advice. Honestly, I'd sign if I were you. You wouldn't want to look like you're just after his money. People are starting to talk. Even Charles got in on it, cornering me after a family brunch. "Sign the papers, Emily. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." It was suffocating. A constant storm I couldn't escape. The breaking point came 1 week before the wedding. Nathaniel and I were supposed to meet with the planner to finalize the details, but instead, he showed up at my apartment with the prenup in his hands. His eyes were tired, his voice strained. Please, just sign it. If you don't, there won't be a wedding." "They mean it this time." I stared at him, my heart breaking all over again. "So that's it? You'd let them control us? You'd let them decide if we get married?" He looked away, shame written across his face. "It's not like that. You know I love you, but if you don't sign, they'll cut me off. No inheritance, no support, nothing." I froze. His words sank deep into my bones. No inheritance, no support. That was what this was really about. Not me, not us, not love, money. His love had conditions. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The humiliation, the insults, the pressure, it hardened into something sharp, cold, unbreakable. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for respect. I was fighting for survival, for dignity, for revenge. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, took the papers from his hands and said, "Fine, I'll sign." His face lit up with relief. He kissed my forehead, whispering, "You won't regret this. I promise." But inside, I was already planning. If they wanted me to sign, I would. But they had no idea what I was capable of. And when I was done, they would regret ever underestimating me. The day I agreed to sign the prenup, everything changed. At least, that's what Nathaniel and his family thought. They believed they'd broken me, that I'd finally bent to their will. What they didn't realize was that they hadn't broken me at all. They'd forged me into something harder, sharper. I signed the papers 2 days later. Evelyn hosted a private meeting at their estate to make it official. She had her lawyer present, along with Nathaniel and Richard. The document was laid out on the long mahogany table, pristine white pages filled with cold, clinical language. In the event of divorce, no claim to assets, waiver of rights. Each line felt like a dagger, stripping me of dignity. But I smiled as I picked up the pen. A smile so calm, so agreeable, it disarmed them completely. "There," I said, scrawling my name across the bottom. "Now we can all move forward." Evelyn's eyes sparkled with triumph. "Smart girl," she said. Richard grunted his approval. Nathaniel squeezed my hand, relief washing over his face. He looked at me as though I had just proven my love beyond doubt. What none of them noticed was the copy I had already made of that document when Nathaniel first handed it to me, or the fact that, before signing, I had carefully reviewed every line, every clause, committing it to memory. They thought I was naive. They thought I didn't understand contracts or business or the law, but they didn't know about my father. My father, who may not have been wealthy, but who had spent 30 years as a contracts manager at a construction firm. Growing up, I used to sit at the kitchen table watching him pore over agreements with a red pen, circling loopholes, highlighting clauses, muttering under his breath about what was fair and what wasn't. I knew more about contracts than they'd ever imagined. So, while they celebrated their victory, I was already piecing together my strategy. Because if they wanted to play dirty, I would play smarter. In the days that followed, I played the part of the obedient bride-to-be. I smiled. At the fittings, nodded politely at the tastings, listened quietly as Evelyn lectured me on how a Hughes wife should behave. I became invisible in the way they wanted me to be, but behind closed doors, I was building something else. I contacted an attorney, not one of theirs, but someone I trusted, someone discreet. I showed him the prenup. He raised an eyebrow, then smirked. This is aggressive, brutal even. But I see what you're thinking. There are angles here. Together we began drafting something new, a plan that would take advantage of their arrogance, their blind confidence. Meanwhile, I dug into the Hughes empire, their businesses, their partnerships, their public image. I researched Evelyn's charities, Richard's investments, Victoria's questionable spending habits, Charles's failed ventures. Piece by piece, I gathered information, connecting dots they thought no one could see. Nathaniel remained oblivious. To him, I was just his fiancée, quietly preparing for our big day. He mistook my calm for acceptance. He thought the storm had passed, but inside me the storm was only just beginning. The wedding day crept closer, and with it, the tension grew unbearable. My family, sweet and supportive, tried to help where they could, but they didn't know the full extent of what I was facing. I didn't tell them. Not yet. They would have begged me to walk away, to save myself from the Hughes family's poison. But I wasn't walking away, not when I had the chance to make them pay. The night before the wedding, Nathaniel held me close, his voice soft in the dark. "Tomorrow, everything will be perfect," he whispered. "We'll finally be married, and nothing else will matter." I kissed him back, my lips gentle, my heart ice. Perfect, I agreed. But perfection wasn't my goal anymore. Justice was. Revenge was. And by the time I was finished, the Hughes family wouldn't just regret pushing that prenup on me, they would regret ever letting me into their lives at all. The wedding week arrived, and the Hughes estate buzzed like a hive. Caterers unloading trucks, florists arranging mountains of white roses, planners shouting instructions. It was the kind of spectacle Evelyn Hughes had dreamed of for her son's big day. To her, this wasn't just a wedding, it was a showcase. Proof that her family was untouchable, that her wealth and power extended to every corner of her life. I played my role flawlessly, smiling when expected, nodding at Evelyn's endless suggestions, thanking Richard for his generosity, laughing politely at Victoria and Charles's snide remarks. I became the perfect puppet bride, and they never saw the strings I was pulling behind the scenes. What they didn't know was that I had already spent weeks setting my trap. Step 1 was the attorney. He helped me draft a parallel agreement. 1. That legally undercut the prenup they'd forced me to sign. It wasn't about voiding it outright. That would raise alarms. Instead, it introduced new obligations hidden under the guise of a charitable foundation donation. The Hughes family prided themselves on philanthropy. Evelyn in particular loved being seen as a saint in society circles. My attorney disguised the clause so that, when combined with certain provisions of the prenup, it forced them into a corner. If they challenged it, their hypocrisy would become public record. Step 2 was information. By then, I had quietly gathered enough dirt on the Hughes empire to cause real damage if released. Richard's offshore accounts, Victoria's embezzled, funds disguised as personal expenses, Charles's reckless investments, many underwritten by family money, Evelyn's misuse of charity donations for personal luxuries. Individually, the scandals were bad. Together, they were catastrophic. Step 3 was presentation. A wedding isn't just about vows. It's about an audience. The Hughes family had invited hundreds of guests, many of them powerful business associates, politicians, and high society elites. The very people whose respect they craved. I knew if the truth came out at the right moment, in front of the right crowd, the Hughes' reputation would collapse faster than they could recover, and that's exactly what I intended. The night before, the wedding, while Evelyn fussed over the final rehearsal, I slipped away. I met with a trusted journalist I'd contacted weeks earlier. I handed him a neatly prepared dossier. Bank statements, receipts, photos, internal emails. Proof of the Hughes family's corruption. He flipped through the pages, his eyes widening. "This is explosive. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once this hits, there's no turning back." I smiled, calm and certain. I've never been more sure of anything. The journalist promised the story would break at noon. The following day, just as the ceremony was beginning, Step 4 was emotional. I knew Nathaniel wasn't like his family. He loved me in his flawed, weak way. But he was tied to them by loyalty and fear. If I left without making him choose, he'd always default to them. So I made sure he would see the truth with his own eyes. At the worst possible moment, on the morning of the wedding, I looked at myself in the mirror in my white gown. The dress was beautiful, delicate lace flowing into a sweeping train, but it wasn't just a wedding gown. It was armor. Today, I wasn't a bride. I was an executioner. The guests filled the lavish estate gardens. Rows of gold chairs, a string, quartet, champagne flowing freely. Evelyn floated among them like a queen, basking in admiration. Richard shook hands with senators and CEOs. Victoria and Charles whispered in corners, already celebrating their perceived victory over me. And Nathaniel? He stood at the altar, nervous but smiling, waiting for me. I walked down the aisle with my father at my side, his hand trembling on mine. He had no idea of the storm about to break, but he whispered, "You deserve happiness, sweetheart," forced a smile. "I know, Dad. I'm about to take it." The ceremony began. The minister spoke, the crowd hushed, and just as Nathaniel took my hands in his, the first alerts hit the guests' phones. A ripple went through the crowd. Murmurs, frowns, screens lighting up with breaking news headlines. Hughes family charity under investigation for fraud. Exclusive, offshore accounts, hidden funds, lavish spending. Sources reveal misuse of donations by prominent family. I watched it unfold in real time. The guests gasped, whispered, turned to look at Evelyn and Richard, who were suddenly pale, frozen. Victoria's face drained of color, her phone shaking in her hand. Charles swore under his breath, bolting upright. The minister faltered, confused before trying to continue. But no one was listening anymore. And Nathaniel, poor Nathaniel, looked from me to his family, his eyes wide with shock, betrayal, confusion. "What's happening?" he whispered. I squeezed his hand gently, leaned close, and whispered back, "This is what happens when you try to turn love into a contract." The ceremony dissolved into chaos. Guests excused themselves, some openly disgusted, others staying only to watch the scandal unravel. Journalists swarmed outside the gates. Within minutes, the Hughes name was in ruins. But I wasn't finished yet. Because the final step, step 5, was still to come. Chaos surrounded me at the altar. Guests abandoning their seats, whispers turning into shouts, Evelyn barking orders at staff to shut this nonsense down. Richard's face was purple. With rage, his phone glued to his ear as he shouted at some unfortunate lawyer or PR manager, but none of it mattered. The real show hadn't even started yet. The minister attempted to salvage dignity. "Perhaps we should pause—" "No," I interrupted, my voice ringing clear over the murmurs. "We're not pausing. In fact, I have something to share." Every head turned toward me. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Nathaniel looked at me, pleading silently, still trying to make sense of it all. "Your family wanted this wedding to be a transaction," I said, my voice steady. "A deal, a contract. They shoved a prenup in my face and told me to sign or walk away. Well, I signed it. But what they didn't expect was that my own assets would come into play." I reached into the folds of my gown and pulled out an envelope. My attorney had delivered it that very morning. Inside was the final executed agreement, notarized, sealed, and binding. While your family was busy protecting its billions, I quietly liquidated one of my trusts, I continued. $9 million, my inheritance from my grandfather. Money your lawyers never bothered to ask about because they assumed I came from nothing. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's jaw dropped. By signing the prenup, I agreed to waive any claim to the Hughes fortune, I said. But do you know what else it states? That all gifts, dowries, or contributions from my side become shared marital property, effective immediately upon marriage. I turned to Nathaniel, locking eyes with him. He looked utterly lost, caught between love, loyalty, and panic. "So congratulations, Nathaniel," I said sweetly. "The moment we said I do, my $9 million became yours. Or rather, ours. Except, here's the twist." I held up the second document, the one my attorney had drafted, disguised as part of the prenup package. This clause establishes that the entirety of that contribution must be funneled into the Hughes family's charitable foundation within 30 days. The same foundation that, as of this morning, is under federal investigation for fraud. The silence was deafening. Then, an audible gasp from the guests as the realization hit them. If the money went into the foundation, it would be frozen, seized, and investigated along with the rest of their fraudulent accounts. The Hughes family wouldn't be able to touch a cent. In fact, it would strengthen the case against them, because suddenly millions of dollars more would appear to vanish into their corrupt empire. Evelyn staggered, her perfect composure cracking. "This is impossible. You can't." "Oh, but I can," I cut in. "Your own lawyers made it binding. You wanted to humiliate me with that prenup, and you didn't even notice the clause you signed off on." Richard slammed his fist on the table beside him. "You conniving little—" "Careful," I said coldly. "You wouldn't want to threaten your new daughter-in-law in front of 200 witnesses." The crowd was electric now. Phones recording, guests whispering, gleefully at the spectacle of the mighty Hughes dynasty being gutted by a woman they had underestimated. Nathaniel's hands trembled as he held mine. His lips parted, but no words came out. He looked broken, betrayed by his own family, trapped in a web none of them saw coming. And I had never felt stronger. "You see," I said, stepping forward, voice rising with every word, "I may not have had your billions, but I had patience, I had knowledge, and I had the will to fight back. You thought you could strip me of dignity, that you could turn me into a pawn. Instead, I've turned your greed into a noose around your own necks." The minister, utterly bewildered, finally muttered, I think this ceremony is concluded." "No," Evelyn hissed, lunging toward Nathaniel. "We can fix this. We can undo this. Just—" But Nathaniel pulled back from her, his face pale, his voice hoarse. "No, Mother, she beat you. She beat all of us." The words hung in the air like a verdict, and that was it. The collapse wasn't loud. It was quiet, insidious, the way a mighty tower crumbles not with an explosion, but with a single, fatal crack. The Hughes family's empire wasn't just stained, it was poisoned. The $9 million wasn't just money, it was the final nail in their coffin. As I walked away from the altar, gown sweeping behind me, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Their legacy was burning, and I was the one who lit the match. Warnings. After the wedding was surreal, the media had descended on the Hughes estate like a swarm. Helicopters hovered overhead, reporters broadcasted live from the driveway. Guests uploaded videos, which went viral within minutes. Within hours, the story of the Hughes family's corruption was everywhere. Inside the estate, it was chaos. Evelyn screamed at Richard, demanding explanations, blaming him, the lawyers, anyone but herself. Victoria was sobbing, Charles pacing, trying to salvage whatever dignity he could, but there was none to salvage. The documents, the proof, the media coverage, it was all public now. The empire they had built, polished and guarded for generations, was crumbling. And I sat quietly in my room at the estate's guest wing, sipping tea, the faintest smile on my lips. I had orchestrated every detail, every leak, every clause, every move was perfectly executed. The Hughes family had underestimated me at every turn, and that had been their fatal mistake. Nathaniel knocked softly at the door. "Emily, can we talk?" I gestured for him to sit. He looked exhausted, torn, and full of guilt. He had always loved me, but now he faced the truth. His loyalty to his family had blinded him to the depth of their cruelty and the depth of my resolve. I didn't know they'd go this far," he said. I thought we could navigate it together." I studied him carefully. He wasn't a villain, just weak in the ways his parents had taught him to be. "You were trapped," I said, gently. "But it's over now. You don't have to be part of their tyranny anymore." His eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I can forgive myself." I reached out and took his hand. "You can't change the past, but you can choose your future, and so can I." The Hughes family, meanwhile, faced legal scrutiny like never before. Investigations into misused charity funds, offshore accounts, and fraudulent investments were underway. Bank accounts frozen, properties scrutinized, business deals collapsing, all triggered in part by the documents I had strategically injected into their foundation. It was devastating. Not violent, not vengeful in a physical sense, but it destroyed their power, their reputation, their leverage. Every journalist, every guest, every social media post made sure of that. Evelyn tried to approach me, furious and humiliated. "You'll pay for this," she spat. I stood tall, unflinching. "I already have. You made your choices. You forced my hand. You underestimated me. That's the only mistake here." Richard, once a towering figure in business circles, now shrank in public. Scrutiny, unable to face the press or the fallout. Victoria and Charles were left to manage what little they could salvage, their futures irreparably tarnished. And Nathaniel? He stayed by my side. He had no fortune now, no inherited empire, but he had clarity. He understood me. He understood what it meant to fight back, to refuse submission, to reclaim dignity when everyone else tried to strip it away. As the days passed, the media coverage expanded beyond the initial wedding scandal. Investigations continued, and the Hughes family's empire began to fracture irreversibly. My $9 million gift had not only humiliated them, it had financially crippled their foundation and revealed the depth of their corruption. Friends and family who had doubted my decision to go through with the marriage, given the Hughes family's manipulation, now reached out in awe. "I can't believe what you did," they said. "You completely outsmarted them." And in a quiet moment, as Nathaniel and I walked through the estate gardens, now eerily empty after the media storm, I realized something vital. I hadn't just exacted revenge, I had reclaimed my power. I had turned humiliation, greed, and intimidation into a story of triumph. No one would ever look at me the same way again. I smiled, not because of the money or even the victory, but because I had taken control. My parents, who had always tried to teach me integrity and strength, would have been proud. And as for the Hughes family, they had learned the hard way. Never underestimate the person you try to crush. Weeks passed after the wedding. The Hughes empire continued to crumble under investigation, with board members resigning, donors withdrawing, and media outlets publishing exposés on their corruption. Evelyn and Richard's public image was destroyed. Victoria and Charles were blacklisted from society events and struggling to salvage whatever credibility remained. Nathaniel and I had settled into a quieter life, not wealthy in the way his family had been, but free. Free from the chains of manipulation, from the toxicity of greed. I thought the story had ended there, but it hadn't. One afternoon, I received a plain, unmarked envelope at our apartment. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed neatly. "Emily, we underestimated you. We tried to destroy you, and instead, you destroyed us. Congratulations. But be warned, the game isn't over. Watch your back, no signature, no return address, just a threat veiled in acknowledgement of defeat." I smiled. They had realized too late that I had won. But more importantly, they were admitting it. Though I had already moved far beyond fear, I had left something in place months earlier. A series of anonymous tips to authorities, journalists, and even Nathaniel's business contacts. Every penny of that $9 million gift had been structured in such a way that if anyone tried to claim it or interfere, it would trigger automatic disclosure of more damning evidence against the Hughes family. And now, with them broken and scrambling, there was nothing they could do. Every threat they issued only tightened the web I had woven around them. I looked at Nathaniel as he walked into the room, holding 2 cups of coffee. He laughed softly, noticing my expression. "You're smiling. Are you thinking about them? Again?" I shook my head. "Not really. I'm thinking about how far we've come. How all their schemes, their manipulations, their threats, none of it matters anymore." We turned the table, Nathaniel. Completely. He sat beside me, his hand finding mine. "You really did it. You didn't just win. You annihilated them." I nodded, but then added something he hadn't expected. "And here's the final twist." I pulled out another envelope, this one embossed with my initials. Inside was a check for exactly $9 million, the same amount I had donated to the Hughes Foundation. But the check wasn't going anywhere near them. Instead, I had used it to establish a new foundation in my name, dedicated to helping victims of corporate corruption and families abused by wealth and power. Every dollar they tried to claim, every penny they thought would humiliate me, is now being used for something meaningful, I said, my eyes shining with quiet triumph. Their greed built it, but their defeat funds it. Forever. Nathaniel's mouth fell open. That's incredible. You didn't just take revenge. You made it impossible for them to touch you, and you turned it into something good. Exactly, I said, standing and walking to the window. The city skyline shimmered in the afternoon sun. Revenge isn't about anger anymore. It's about justice. And sometimes, it's about showing people that trying to control someone else can have consequences they'll never recover from. Behind me, I could hear Nathaniel laughing softly. So what now? I turned to him, smiling. Now we live. We enjoy the freedom they tried to deny us, and we make sure that everyone who underestimated me knows one thing. Never, ever think a woman who's been cornered can't fight back, because when she does, she doesn't just fight, she wins. And with that, I closed the chapter on the Hughes family. Not with anger, not with malice, but with a brilliance that would be remembered. Because revenge, when executed perfectly, doesn't just punish, it reshapes the world, and that world, finally, was mine.